Hey guys, welcome back to the shop. I have strings on guitar number 85 now. Very, very exciting. All I have to do is slot this nut and then I can tune this sucker up and actually play it. Before we get started here on messing around with this guitar, I thought it would be fun to just answer some of your questions. So I'm going to go through some of these real quick. Let's see. That's a beast of a counterboard bit, but seems to work nicely. 40 to 1 is very, this is Russell Scott. 40 to 1 is very impressive, but I imagine it'll go out of tune slightly, as they all do, as it's probably more down to string stretch, temperature, etc. What he's talking about there with the 40 to 1 is in my last video. I was talking about these Steinberger gearless tuners, which are the equivalent of a 40 to 1 tuning ratio. Now, his question is just a bit of a misunderstanding of what that 40 to 1 actually implies. What we're talking about there with the tuning ratio is not the tuning stability, which is what I think you were getting at, Russell Scott. The tuning stability is basically when your strings go out of tune and you have to retune them. How often, how frequently do you have to do that? That's your tuning stability. It's really annoying if they do that a lot. They're very stable, and he's right, this has more to do with the string itself when they don't down tune themselves, requiring you to tune them back up all the time. These 40 to 1 ratio tuners, think of it this way. If you've ever used ukulele tuners, cheap ukulele tuners, real cheap, those planetary tuners, and when you tune up a ukulele, a cheap ukulele, you'll notice that it's actually really hard to land on a really accurate pitch, because the tuning, which is usually 4 to 1 or something really low like that on those cheap tuners, that 4 to 1 tuning ratio is like you just breathe on that tuner. You just barely turn it, just a subtle movement, and the pitch jumps up. Or you bring it back down and the pitch just jumps back down. So it's really hard, if the spot you're trying to hit is right here, to actually hit it, because you are constantly overshooting and then overcorrecting in the other direction when you down tune it. So they're just very imprecise in that way, those 4 to 1 cheapo planetary tuners. The higher tuning ratio tuners, what they get you is that micro precision, so that it's actually very easy to land on that spot that you're aiming for, right? You can get there with the 4 to 1 tuners. It's just you're probably going to overcorrect a couple times and come back and forth before you land on it. So you can think of the benefit of high ratio tuners is actually smaller than many people think. It's more of a micro improvement to your guitar, because it really only affects, you only get to experience the benefit of those tuners when you're tuning them. It makes that job a little bit easier to do, because I just explained it. I don't want to sit on that for too long, but I think that was a little bit of a, you're thinking of tuning stability, and I'm thinking of how fine that the tuning actually is, how much you can micro tune that tuner. Okay. Love those, again, this is in reference to the tuners. Love those tuners. Ordered a set last week to try in my next build. Could you add a link to the source of that counterbore bit? He's talking about the bit I use to counterbore these. Sorry, I can't. Not because I don't want to. It's just, it would be just as easy for you to find these as it was for me. I didn't save the link or anything like that. I included in the video, it flashes onto the screen the name of that tool or that bit if you want to buy it. And as with whenever I mention the tool or a bit or something like that on camera, I will usually throw the name of that thing on screen, and you can, if you just copy and paste that into your search, you're going to find the same thing. So you might have to scroll around a little bit, but you'll find it. Oh, and by the way, anytime I mention tools in here, there's another reason why I'm not providing a link. I don't do Amazon affiliate kind of stuff or any affiliate stuff with tool companies. So I'm really just doing it for the benefit of you guys. So, you know, do me a favor and just look it up yourselves. Sorry. Let's see. Walter Ryder. Walter Ryder is... I really appreciate you, Walter Ryder. Walter Ryder, I have seen commenting on my videos almost literally since the beginning, since possibly my first video. So thank you, Walter. I always appreciate seeing comments from you. Thank you, Eric. Very interesting. Would you be so kind and show how to use these tuners? Well, that's what I think you're going to see a little bit of that throughout this video as we get into our work on the nut. And oh, I had one other, there was a comment in here I wanted to do. Yes, this is from Hand Tool Wood Guy, and this is on a different video. If you only have, he's talking about the heat in my shop. I'll just paraphrase this instead of reading it. I was using my wood stove in the shop in one of my videos, and he's asking about dealing with temperature change, moisture change, and all of that with having an uncontrolled environment like that, where you have to, you know, throw the wood in and heat it, and so overnight it gets super cold, and then you heat it up during the day, and that actually would be hell on your wood, and especially your completed instruments in the shop. So that is not what I do actually, and I didn't make that distinction in the video, so I'm glad he brought this up. I do actually have electric baseboard heat that will heat this shop, and I just leave it on all winter. It will heat the shop. It's not a super massive heater, but it will heat the shop as long as it stays above basically single digits. But if it gets down into single digits or low teens overnight, then when I come in the morning, I can definitely feel it. It will be, at its worst, it'll be in like the high 40s indoors, but it never, you know, the heater is able to keep up enough to keep it well above freezing. And that's only on the worst days, right? So most of the time here in central-ish Pennsylvania, most of the time it doesn't get that cold even in the winter. So usually we're just in the 30s. You know, the deepest part of winter. So Pennsylvania is interesting. We actually have the biggest freeze-thaw cycle in the whole country. So what that means is we are constantly going below 32, above 32, below 32, above 32. It's why our roads suck, because we have potholes everywhere because of the ice wedging action from the expansion of the ice, which cracks the road, and then it melts again, and then it fills in with, you know, more water into those cracks, freezes again, cracks the road even more. That's Pennsylvania. So anyway, just kind of describing how rough our winters are here, and they're kind of medium rough. They're not that bad. So anyway, my electric baseboard heat keeps up most of the time, and on those very, very cold days when I come in the morning, I know that I just have to add that little extra something, which is the wood stove. But to the spirit of your question, I just want to say that yes, I agree with you that that would be absolute hell on your instruments. And if you were in that situation where you're only heating with wood when you were in the shop and it was just left to the elements overnight, That kind of chaos would be something you would have to figure out some solution for. Otherwise, you would just constantly be dealing with really warped wood, and even worse, dealing with warped finished instruments. And there's all kinds of problems with that, as you know. Okay, so I think that's good for the questions. I haven't done that before, actually, just answering questions on the camera like this. So let me know what you guys think of that. Maybe I'll do it more often. I don't know. Trying new things. Speaking of new things, this guitar is a new thing, almost, because it's almost complete. And let's get to work on that nut. Okay, so the first thing I'm going to do is set my string spacing here. And I don't use any particular numbers for this. I just line up, get this aerial view like you guys have from the camera there, this bird's eye view of it. Hang my head over, and I'm just looking where the splay of the string to see where that lines up in relation to the bevels at the end of the fret wire. Because if you're too close to those bevels, guess what? That string is going to, here, I'll try and simulate this, do that sort of thing, right? That's the worst. You ever play a guitar where the treble E string just keeps sliding off that bevel? That's because when they set the string splay, they put it too close to those bevels. So you definitely want it far enough away that that's not going to happen. But beyond that, there's no need to go excessively far in, which what happens there is then your string splay is just too clustered, and it's hard to pick out individual strings then, right? So you'd be making a bad finger picking guitar if you clustered the strings too tightly together. 3/32 of an inch, I think, is a pretty good standard if you just want to, measure it and mark it off. 3/32 of an inch from the edge of the bevel. You put your string there, but you can also just eyeball it. Okay. Once I have it good, just marking it, and then this can actually go to the side once that's marked. I'm going to do the same thing up here. It's a little bit less critical that just because the way that your hand wraps around the way you play, it's less likely that you're going to have that problem on the top, but certainly if it's right over that bevel, it is going to fall off of it. So you can get away with being a little closer to the bevel on the top, but you don't have to. You can tuck it in just as much as you did on the bottom if you want to. I'm just using a little hobby saw here just to make little starter cuts. This is not what I use to actually cut the nut slot. So for the treble E string, I just made a little cut. On the bass E, however, I have to roll the saw a little bit, basically use the saw and attack the side walls of the cut that I make in order to widen out that little starter notch. And that's just to accommodate the larger string there. Doesn't have to be of an exact width or anything. It's just if I don't roll the saw, the string won't hold. And that's the whole goal here. This initial goal is just to get the strings to hold. See that? It's just holding, just barely, in that notch. Same with this one. Okay, so that sets our outside E strings. So that's our total string splay. Now we just have to evenly measure for all the strings in between, except we don't actually want them to be evenly spaced. So we're not going to evenly measure. What we want is the strings to be a little bit more spread out in the bass area and a little bit more tightly together on the treble side. And that's to counter the fact that if we did have the center of each string perfectly spaced out, it would actually be too clustered, or at least it would feel too clustered in the bass side where all the big fat wound strings are, because those strings are so fat. On the treble side, it would feel wider, more spacious. So in order to even that out, the best thing to do, honestly, is to just use the StewMax string spacing ruler. I remember for the longest time I thought this ruler was gimmicky and I didn't buy it, and actually somebody ended up giving it to me, and it beats the hell out of, you know, using math or just guessing at where to put these. It's just really easy to use. Alright, so we're going to line up our notches here. That's close. What you're doing is looking for 6 marks in between your 2 strings. And for both of the outside marks to be dead on. That looks dead on, but let's go one more and see if that gets any better. That's a little bit worse, so we'll go back to this one. This is perfect. Alright, now those little holes there, I know were designed so that you could just mark through these holes, but actually this pencil might work. Usually my pencils are too thick. Let's try marking through the holes. No. Okay. So if you can't mark through the holes, if you have a thicker pencil like mine, just hold it steady. Very carefully. Breathe slowly and make your mark. You know, I'm not like a big gun person, but I've shot guns, and it's fun. But this is a lot like, I think, like, you know, breathing right before you take a shot, if any of you guys are familiar with that. Because if I am not careful here, it's very easy, as I'm going to mark, that's like pulling the trigger and I end up, you know, moving the ruler just slightly. So you just got to be really careful there. There's probably some way to fix that in place while you're marking, but as long as you're very steady like that, taking calm breaths, it's easy to make those marks. Okay, give it the eyeball test, and that's what I'm doing right now, just pull back, look at it from above. Does it look good to your eye? That way you can pick out if you know, just made some large judgment error that you didn't notice when you're looking at it close up. So that looks good. The next step, we're just gonna do the same thing we did for the outside E strings and just make little starter notches. And the amount that you roll each notch depends on the string. So the B string, you don't really need to roll it all, although I rolled it just slightly. The G string, I'm gonna roll just slightly. And again, these aren't supposed to be deep at all. It's just meant to cradle the string to hold its position. Now the D string definitely needs more rolling. Now when you roll, you gotta be careful to spend the same amount of time on each side wall. Like, don't roll too much to one side because you will move your center then. A string needs a whole lot of rolling. Alright. Those look pretty good. I think those will hold our strings, but we'll find out. Let's put them on. So this, by the way, Walter Ryder, this is how these tuners work. You just pass the end through this little hole, just like that. Tighten this down. So this top thing is actually, it's not the adjustment for the tuning. That is actually a lock for the string, because you pass the string through that little hole, and you can see the end sticking out there. And unlike on normal conventional tuners, you don't need a whole bunch of extra string. You just leave a tiny bit extra there. And I've got that locked down. The actual tuning is on the back. Here, I'll show you. These. So when I turn that, then this shaft here takes a dive. It goes, literally descends down into the headstock. It's kind of cool. Let's get myself into my slot. There we go. Alright, these don't have to be anywhere near, I'm going to loosen that actually a little bit more, anywhere near pitch yet. Just getting them, I'd say tuned enough so that you get an audible tone out of it, but nowhere near pitch. Okay, pass that through, lock it up. And then turn the knob on the back, and the tuner shaft goes down, carrying the string with it. So there's no string wound around the post. It's just pulled straight down. Alright, so that's what a good string splay should look like. And you can see it actually gets closer to the ends of the fretboard down here. That's just because on this particular guitar, the bevels actually start out steep in the front and take up less space in the back, so the strings can actually afford to get closer to the edge. This next step is important. We want to know how deep to cut our nut slots. So what we need to know is, one, the height of the fret tops, and well, that's what we need to know, and then we need to add a tiny amount to that height of the fret tops, because of course we don't want to cut our nut slots down to the height of the fret tops. Then the string would literally rest on the fret tops and not make any sounds. So we don't want that. We want a little bit up off the height of the fret tops. I always like to do somewhere between 6 and 7 thousandths of an inch, maybe 8 thousandths of an inch. Actually, I do 8 thousandths of an inch off the fret tops only for new builders. Sometimes if someone's very worried about going too far when they're cutting their nut slots, what you can do is give yourself a little bit of extra room. So cut it just a little bit higher, and then at the setup stage, when we're sanding the bottom of the nut to bring the level down, you'll just sand a little bit more than you otherwise would. So that's the safer way of doing it. You just do something like 8 thousandths of an inch. So I'm going to do 7 thousandths of an inch here. So I have this 7 thousandths of an inch feeler gauge. And then these other feeler gauges, I'll just show you. This is how I determine this whole feeler gauge set here. What you do is you rest a straight edge on 2 of your frets. I always just do the 2 that are right next to the nut. And then you figure out how many feeler gauges you can fit underneath it. Of course, in the set of automotive feeler gauges, all the feeler gauges are a different size. That doesn't matter. You're just trying to find a random grouping of feeler gauges that will fit under there. And then whatever that ends up being, you add 7. So that's why I always put this 7/1000ths of an inch feeler gauge to the side and add it to my stack after I've determined the fret tops. Okay? So this represents the fret tops, and this is the extra little bit we need. Add them together. Now I'm going to take this and rest it against the nut and just push down slightly. If I push down really hard, I can flex the whole thing. I don't want to do that. I want to push down hard enough that it flattens against the radius of the fretboard. So you can feel it really easily. You'll know if you're pushing too hard. So I've flattened it to the radius, and now I can mark okay, and I don't have to get directly under each string. I just mark between them, and that's good enough. This is just a rough mark anyway. This is what I'm going to do is I'm going to cut down to my pencil line, which is my rough mark, and then after I get to the pencil line, then I'll pull out my feeler gauge set and place it back in there, hold it like this, and cut with the feeler gauge set in place right down to the metal of the feeler gauge set. So that's my there's my rough cut to the pencil line, and then my fine tuning to get it just perfect, very accurate, right down to the level of my feeler gauges. All right, let's start with, it doesn't matter which string we start with, but we'll start on the treble side. Loosen it up, pull that to the side, grab my files. I've got a set of Japanese files here. These are great. I also have some StewMac files. I'm going to go grab those. Now, believe it or not, I actually like these cheaper Japanese files better than the StewMac ones, and that's only because StewMac decided to do this tapered shape, so it tapers down to the gauge that it lists. So here, like if it says 75/1000ths of an inch, it starts out, the file is wide in the middle, and then it tapers down to 75/1000ths of an inch at the edge. And some people like that, some people don't. In certain cases I find it useful with certain gauges of strings, but most of the time I actually, if I can, I like to use these ones. But I bring them both out because I want to use specific gauges or specific sizes that match the gauges of my strings, and sometimes I can get them from this set and sometimes from my StewMac set. So the rule of thumb is this. It's very simple. It's you want the file size that matches the string gauge. So this is 12/1000ths of an inch. So I would need a 12/1000ths of an inch file. If I don't have 12/1000ths of an inch, I want the next size up, always up, never lower. So let's say if I had an 11/1000ths of an inch file and a 16/1000ths of an inch file. You might think I'll go with the 11, it's closer, but no, it's less, so I don't want it. I want the next size up, so I would go all the way up to the 16. And yeah, it would be a little extra wide, but that would be okay. That's better than having even slightly too small of a slot for the gauge of your string. In this case, I won't have that problem. I got a 13 right here, and I know with these files, I actually do have a 12. I'll go ahead and use the 12. We'll be as precise as possible here, but I could use that 13 and it'd be fine. Nobody would notice. Okay, so now I'm going to reference this right in that notch we made earlier. And the most important thing that I'm doing here is I'm angling my notch so that it peaks at the front edge, the fretboard facing edge of the nut. If you just file a notch holding this flat, then the break point of the string will be wherever the highest point of that flat ramp is. And it might be in the middle, it might be in the back edge, or you might get lucky and it is actually at the very front, which is where you want it. So we want to know that it's at the front, so what we're going to do is angle this like this, so that for sure that string will peak right here, and that will be the starting point or the breaking point of the string over the nut. Doesn't matter what the angle is, just that it's angled up. Conveniently enough, we have an angle right here. It's our headstock angle. So I just eyeball the headstock angle and try and follow the headstock angle as much as I can. Other than that, I just want to make sure I'm not sort of pitching to the side like this, or to use airplane terminology. My brother's a airplane pilot, so I hear a lot of this stuff. So I'm not pitching, and then also I don't want to be yawing. This is yawing to the side, right? So just keep it nice and straight. Don't pitch or yaw, and make sure that you are cutting at such an angle that it peaks at the front of the nut. And that's it. That is nut slotting. With this particular tuner configuration, on these first two, I have to, unfortunately, I can only do short little strokes like this because the tuner is so close to it. I guess I could remove the tuner, but it's not that big of a deal, so I just leave it in. On these middle ones, you can do nice long strokes. And so what I'm going for right now is I'm just filing all the way down to that line. Once I get to the line, and I know I've already mentioned this, but I'm just repeating it, then I add the feeler gauge set to get it down that last little bit. Pretty close. It's helpful to have a file cleaning brush on hand. I don't have one at the moment. I lost mine, so I'm going to get a new one and clean this later. But it does make, it tends to get gummed up, the edge of the file, and it doesn't work like it did when you first started. You can kind of clean it up with your fingers, though. Okay, very close to the pencil line. And I'm at the pencil line. Now I'm going to add this. And I want to make sure I don't just place this here and let it hang loose like that, because it'll flare up. Remember, we have a radius on our fretboard, so you want to press it down to that radius, but not to an over radius. Just let it conform to the fretboard. And now I'm going to go that last little bit. Okay. The coolest thing about this, and this isn't really something I can show on the camera. Actually, I can. I can show this on the camera. All right. So what I really love about this technique with the feeler gauge set is I can breathe on this and rub the metal so that's nice and shiny. And it might be shiny anyway, but they get dull over time. So if it's not shiny, just breathe on it and rub the metal. Rub it for good luck. And then place it back in there. And if I look at this, here when I show you this, I don't want the pencil line to obscure what you're looking at. Hold that thought. Alright, you don't need that pencil line there anymore, and it actually only makes it harder to see when you're truly there. So I'm just showing you this as a sort of a demonstration here. Alright. I'm not really sure if you're going to be able to see this, honestly. So, yeah, you can't see that at all. Alright, I'll just describe it. That's not going to work. This camera's not good enough. So when you shine up the metal, what you've created is effectively a little mirror that you can place up against the notch. And normally, if I was, say, using something that wasn't shiny and reflective, and I placed it up there as a barrier to cut to, it would be very hard for me to tell unless I had really excellent vision when I was right above that barrier, you know, in this case my feeler gauge set, because I want to cut to just before I hit it, right? Now, if I could double my vision, make it twice as good, that would obviously help. If I could, you know, magnify it essentially, like I'm wearing magnifier glasses or something. With using the reflective material, you essentially can do that, because what you have is your notch going down like this, and then in the reflection that you see on your feeler gauge set, you see a second upside down notch like this. And what you're trying to do is get the bottom of both of those notches to just barely touch. So what you're looking at is the bridge of material between the real notch that you're cutting and the reflection of that notch. I know I'm losing some of you right now, but if I drew this out, as I have for many people, it would make sense if I drew it out on a piece of paper. Perhaps I will some other time, but I don't want to digress too much here like I already have. Let's just get back to it. If you're really curious about it, just try it yourself, shine up that metal, and you'll see the effect of what I'm talking about, where it essentially makes your vision magnified by that doubling effect. Think of, you're looking at the amount of bone that you have to remove, and the reflection plus that amount of bone doubles it. So as you remove the bone, you're watching both the reflection and the... I'm going to stop trying to explain it. I'm doing a terrible job. All right, let's get back to this. All right, so just a couple more swipes and then we're done. This is where you want to slow down and just creep up on it. Now the metal is there to kind of act as a physical barrier. You can kind of feel when you hit the metal, but the goal is to stop just before I hit the metal. I don't actually want to rely on it being there, although it does help if you do accidentally go too far. Because the thing is, especially with the smaller files will cut through this metal like a knife pretty easily, whereas the bigger files will kind of grind to a halt. So the barrier of your feeler gauge set works a little bit better on those files. But that's why you don't want to rely on it 100%. Plus, you don't want to, jack up your feeler gauge set with file marks all the time and then have to buy new ones. Shining that up. Okay, it's basically there. Go a little bit more. Now, the interesting thing, it's easy to not take seriously your last couple strokes, which are actually the most important. You could cut pretty clumsily, have your angle kind of wander a little bit, getting down to your last couple strokes, but really those last couple strokes, you want to really make sure that you're ramping up to that point, because it's real easy on that last stroke to do sort of like a victory stroke, like that, with a lot of follow through, where you're like, all right, I'm done, great. Really, you want that last stroke to end straight, right? Because if I go like this, I've actually taken a little bit off of that front edge and pushed my intonation point, my breaking point of the string, a little bit further that way, right at the last second. It's kind of a shame. So just be conscious of that as you're taking those final couple strokes. And this whole process should go pretty quick when you're not, filming it and talking about it. Okay. There you have it. I am going to stop now because I think I've given a good demonstration there of nut slotting. What we did here with the E string, you're just going to continue down the other strings, and I'm gonna check back in with you guys basically when this is done. Maybe I'll do another video as I'm stringing it up. By the way, this guitar will be available for sale on my website. It's not up there right now, so if you go, well, maybe I'll put something up in the next couple of days. But anyway, if you're interested in this guitar, it will be available under available instruments on my website, along with possibly one or two other guitars that are already up there. So yeah, check it out. All right, guys, I'm signing off. Bye. If you learned something here, please give this video a like and subscribe so you can be notified when I release a new DIY guitar making video. And if you want to really learn more, take one of my structured online courses at ericschaferguitars.com. or register for a hands-on guitar building workshop here with me in Burnville, Pennsylvania.